Okay. Okay. We'll go ahead and do a quick introduction. Welcome, everyone. So, as you can see on your screen, today we have with us Brian Holst. He's the Executive Director of the Juneau Economic Development Council. And a little bit about Brian before we turn it over to him. He's served in the U.S. Peace Corps as a volunteer in small business development in Latin America and Eastern Europe. Brian has directly managed implementation of programs in microfinance, home improvement lending, environmental planning, disaster mitigation and response, business support services, and various construction infrastructure projects. He's a staunch business advocate for developing talent early, and Brian serves on the Alaska Early Childhood Coordinating Council and is a member of the Juno, I am tongue twisted today, I apologize, and is a member of the Juno Board of Education. Today, he'll share insights gained from over 20 years of commitment to personal, professional, and community development. And with that, thanks, Brian, for joining us, and I'll turn it over for you for presentation.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm especially honored that you chose me in the week of International Women's Day. So I will take that as a positive endorsement from this group. And I'm excited to be here. Let me load up my slide and make sure that it's in the right mode. Yep. Hopefully you're seeing. Yep, great. Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I can only see, now that I got my screen up there, I can't see all of you. It's fun for me if it's conversational. So to the degree somebody wants to stop and ask a question or make a comment or share an insight, that's super helpful. And your questions always help us in our work trying to provide good economic information about Juneau. Here's a couple things I was going to do a little bit more about, a little introduction about myself. I was asked, I understand that's a little bit of this forum as well. So I'll do that. I'll talk a little bit about JEDC. Also a little bit about the approach to economic development that we use here at the Juneau Economic Development Council. And then we'll give you a dive into Juneau's economy so you understand what's going on here. And at the end, give you a little bit of a commercial on our Innovation Summit, which we hope many of you will want to join us. JEDC is able to do our work. We have lots of supporters from around the state. ACS has been a big supporter of JEDC and a collaborator to this day. I don't know if our logo's on there this year, but I'm sure that you've been a huge supporter in our robotics program in particular. Many years of great support. We still have lots of volunteers from Last Communications supporting our robotics program. So here's a little bit about me. I'm from Juneau. I grew up, graduated from Juneau Douglas High School, and then I went off to college. I was one of those kids that thought I'd never come back to Juneau. I mean, too small of a town for me. I joined the Peace Corps. I served in Paraguay for typical services a couple years. I did 2 years. I actually stayed a third year because I was having a great time, and I was able to continue to do my work in a coordinator role. And then I did a funny thing. I was a business volunteer, and I thought I've been giving advice to business people for a few years as a Peace Corps volunteer, and had they only been paying more attention to my advice, they would have all done it much better. So I was in love, and I eventually married somebody in Paraguay, but I went back to Paraguay and opened a business and ran my business for unsuccessfully, mostly, which was a good lesson for me. Unsuccessful in the sense that it was like many things. Starting a business is never easy, and starting a business in another country wasn't any easier. And we went along for a while, but what was clear was that if my business was going to be successful, we would be there long term. And both by that point, I'd convinced Estella to marry me, and from Paraguay, and so we were able to take off. And I began a career as doing some consulting work, and then started working in economic development, primarily in Central America. I was the microfinance advisor for Latin America for a fairly large economic development organization. And in one of those roles, I would be a consultant to banks that were developing microfinance products for the informal sector. Basically, it was trying to make really small loans. The banking sector really focused on large clients, of course, and then in Latin America, as many of you probably know, there's a very large informal sector. And so it was very interesting trying to figure out a way to tap into and support the needs of the really small unbanked sector in the economy. I then moved to work in Eastern Europe in Serbia. I was part of a fairly large investment the U.S. government made. If you remember back to the terrible times in Eastern Europe and the breakup of Yugoslavia, when I went there, Milosevic, who had been the running the country and helping everybody stay at war for way too long, he had just left, and there was a sizable investment, and I went part of a team that launched a large program in southern Serbia. And that was a fascinating program. I arrived in the country in Yugoslavia. One of my children was born in Yugoslavia. The country changed to Serbia, Montenegro. I had another child born in Serbia, Montenegro, and then the country changed its name to Serbia, and I had another child born in Serbia, all with the same doctor, all the same hospital, but in 3 different countries. So those were fascinating times to be there. And then I always wanted to come back. We have 4 children, and we wanted to find a place in the U.S. And that was where I really came to really reappreciate Alaska and Juneau in particular. Was looking around at lots of options, nothing in Juneau. And my father actually sent me an advertisement for the Juneau Economic Development Council needed an executive director. So I'll tell you my brief little story about that. So I applied for this. I wasn't even sure if my international work would make any sense. And it came down to 2 finalists. And we're, of course, doing this over the telephone. And then they said to me, and I was at that point, I think I was in South America at the time. And they said, we have an interview next Tuesday, right? It was the week before. And so on Tuesday, I show up for the interview. And somewhere along in the interview, this is why I think I got the job. Somewhere along in the interview, somebody kind of put together and said, did you fly from where for this interview? I said, from Paraguay. And I'm pretty sure that out of pity, they gave me the job here at the Juneau Economic Development Council. This guy, if he flew this far, we should just give him the job. And I'm glad they did, and I've enjoyed being at the Juneau Economic Development Council ever since. So that's enough about me. Let's get into the topic. The Economic Development Council we're a non-profit organization formed in 1987. The Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation and the Anchorage Economic Corporation, our organization, we're all formed about the same time throughout the state. And we've been in existence ever since. We collaborate with those other organizations as well. We're a completely independent nonprofit, but we have this special relationship with the city. Our focus is Juneau, but we also look at our mission includes all of Southeast Alaska. We have a board. I report to a board. We are fortunate that the mayor of Juneau and the chancellor of the University of Alaska Southeast have permanent seats on our board, and then we have the rest of our at-large board members serving our organization. Great board, helps us do a lot of work. So here's a little bit about our approaches to economic development, and what we see are there are a lot of prevailing. You hear about a lot of these great ideas about how to go about doing economic development. So we have some opinions about this. And so right here on this slide, you see there's this effort to go out there and firm level support, find that big company, that will come and land and make your economy grow. Pick some winning companies or winning approaches, or economic gardening, where you just sort of sprinkle good ideas and hope that something emerges. On the other side, there's others that kind of focus on the environment. Let's build it and they will come. Is this we see this need for you name it, electric vehicles, and so we're going to be the electric vehicle folk to figure it out further. Or there's some big idea that we think we're going to go after, or we're open for business and everything is good. And unfortunately, we hear this sort of terminology that talk in our state sometimes. We talk about economic development, and between these two is really the core to what we do, and that is supporting systems that support entrepreneurs and clusters. And clusters are a special approach. They're an economic entity. It's a combination. It's a concentration of firms in a certain area. So think of the visitor industry as a cluster. The mining industry is a cluster. So it's similar firms in a similar industry. And part of the trouble, as I've talked about, is the some of these approaches have limited potential. Others aren't specific enough to do any good. Others are super high risk. If you get it wrong, which is very likely, you'll get no return. And they're approaches that you'll hear because it sounds like a good approach, but for long-term sustainable economic development, day in and day out, that's going to give you results. You need to focus on two things. You need to focus on having an environment that your entrepreneurs can grow in, and focusing on those industries that already exist in your economy and growing those industries. What do we do at JEDC? Well, the two items in the middle are the two elements I just talked about, which is focusing our key industries and then promoting entrepreneurship. The other two items help make Juneau a great capital city at the top. We have a special role as the capital of Alaska, and so it's really important that for our economy and to be a good capital city, is that we really focus on making sure that we do have a place, a downtown, that people will enjoy working in, people enjoy visiting, people find it productive to come here and do the business of the state of Alaska. So we do take that into consideration because we are the capital city. In developing talent, that's also an important piece that we really find is necessary. Economies are about people, right? We need to remember that. And developing the talent for the economy, it's good for the individual, of course, but it's also really good for the community. So the last item, develop economic developments or deliver economic development services. This is the kind of activity that we are doing today, like providing information to people about our economy. So in a little bit more detail, I won't go into much detail, but to give you a sense. So when we talk about making Juneau a great capital city, there are certain areas of downtown. Aquan Village is the district. If you know Juneau, you know the State Archives building, for example, it's the Willoughby district. It's been renamed recently, but it's the area of downtown Juneau over towards our Federal building. We focus on housing and a few elements that really try to help make Juneau a great city for all of us. It is important in economic development. It doesn't really matter where your coffee shops are in your economy as long as you have them, but it does matter that you have a vibrant downtown. Vibrant downtowns are directly correlated to a successful economy. Regional industries, I mentioned this already, the cluster. So on the right of your screen, this is your lesson in economics. Your refresher is what is an economic cluster. So it's a group of firms in the same related field in a similar geographic area that are linked together. And so when we think about clusters, we think about ocean products, right? The seafood industry, visitor products. We think about the arts and culture sector. And what's important about that is those are sectors, you need to understand those sectors that bring in money to your economy. So visitor industry is a pretty obvious one. You have a visitor comes in, they got loaded with cash in their pockets, and they leave their cash in our community. That's an import, and that's a great way to bring in money from outside, because those funds come into our community, and that allows our resources in our community to grow. Mining, we take rocks out of the ground and they give us cash. The dollars stay here, the rocks go out. Similar with the seafood, we process the seafood. We can add more or less value. We want to add as much value as possible so that as more resources, more money stays here. But that's what a cluster is about. And again, that's key to economic development, is understanding what your clusters are, because that's where your community has already made investments in itself. That's where your businesses have already made investments in yourself. So the most effective strategies, most of the job creation, most of the firm creation, we're talking about 90% of the jobs created and the firms created happen in those clusters that you already are in. Be very wary when your politician says, let's diversify. Because think about what they're saying. Let's go ahead and do something that we're not doing, which probably means we're not very good at. And in economic terms, what you want to do is know what you're good at and really double down on what you're good at and look for opportunities between those things that you're good at, between your clusters. That's the most fruitful area for new entrepreneurship as well. And promote entrepreneurship and small business development. We do that in many different ways. The Alaska Angel Conference is one. Pandair is an investment that the Angel Conference group made last year. If any of you buy shoes from them, they're an Alaskan business. We use the Alaska Crowdfunding Act, and we've been taking turns. Last year, JEDC ran the event. 2 years ago, it was run in Anchorage. This year, it's run in Fairbanks, and we're trying to create a network of investors. JEDC also is heavily involved in. We make loans in Juneau, and we participated in the state had a grant program, and we were super active in that. Helped deliver over $100 million in grants to Alaskan businesses in the last half of 2020. Our talent development piece is another dimension of our work. This is where Alaska Communications has been very helpful, and it continues to be very helpful with their volunteer support, and has been also, in addition to volunteer support, has been very helpful with sponsorship support in prior years to deliver this robotics program throughout the state of Alaska. We've been big advocates for creating, investing in early education. It's super clear from an economic development point of view that if you make that investment early in our young people, it'll pay dividends long term for your economy. And it's so sad when we see policymakers miss that, because the costs of not investing are really, really high, and that's too common here in Alaska. We just don't put enough resources into supporting developing our talent so that those people can then be in the best position to contribute most to our economy. And then here is our transition slide to speaking specifically about Juno. We put together, do some research all the time. Throughout the year, we're updating information. Annually, we come out with an indicator report where we talk about Juneau's economy. So now we're going to dive into Juneau. And hopefully you guys are as excited about learning about Juneau's economy as I am about talking about it. Is that absolutely? Did I hear that?
Yes.
Okay, super. So this is a little pre-pandemic view, and it's kind of, it's kind of hard to really get your head around. But if you look to the at the slide, you see state government represents 24% of our jobs, local and tribal government 14%, mining 9%, and if you slide over, you'll see the federal jobs at 7%, travel and hospitality 10%. You see that between state, local, federal government jobs in Juneau, that's a pretty important part of our economy. But we're also fortunately nicely diversified with mining, with the travel industry, with other services in our community that keep us a little bit more resilient. Also pre-pandemic, the growth in Juneau These are just gross sales in our community. The numbers don't really matter too much. It's more about the general positive trend through 2019, pre-pandemic. And this is for our your econ wonks here in the room. I hope I almost didn't put this slide in, but I thought, shoot, if you guys are asking for information about Juneau's economy, this slide, there's probably too much here to get into, but there's three things going on, and I'll go ahead and explain it. So graphs like this are really helpful to look at different economies, and the size of the bubble represents the relative size, the number of jobs relative to other bubbles in that sector. So if you look at state government near the bottom, that's a big bubble. In the middle, you see local government as a fairly big bubble. And to the right, you see federal government, a smaller bubble, right? But then those are our government jobs, for example. That bubble above them, natural resources and mining, that's our mining sector. So those are the size of the bubble. And then what you see are the wages going across the bottom. So from left to right, you see the jobs that pay the most. In our leisure and hospitality, those jobs pay less than our state government jobs and local government jobs, but our best paying jobs are in the mining sector and our federal government jobs. And that's important to understand. And then on the vertical column, what you see is the change in growth in those sectors, right? And so you see the big bubble of state government, which is a big source of our jobs, below that 0%, meaning we're seeing over the last 5 years a decrease in number of jobs in state government. Federal government, we're losing federal government jobs in Juneau. Fortunately, the mining sector that pays well, we're seeing an increase in those jobs. And transportation, there's a big element of the impact of tourism in transportation because that's all our helicopter tours, et cetera, not just our planes coming in and out. That's growing in Juneau's economy up until 2019, sort of just setting the stage here. And just a little bit about Juneau, just to give you a little more perspective relative to a couple other cities, the cost of living. So the greatest place on earth. Sorry, maybe I should have, that was really for a Juneau crowd. We like to tell each other how great we are. So hopefully, I know you all love your own communities, but try not, I sort of feel like I ask for forgiveness for the title of my slide here, but Juneau is an awesome place to live. It's also a very expensive place to live. It is in this survey, this is data that we collect. There's 245 communities that participate with this data collection series. Only 3 in Alaska. Does Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage participate in this data collection because we have to go out and actually collect the data ourselves for this. But what you see is that, unfortunately, Juneau has the highest cost of living of these 3 communities in Alaska. And it's really as you'll see later in our housing is extremely expensive. And we are only Fairbanks ekes us out in the nation for expensive healthcare. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. So pandemic. So here is the jobs in Juneau. So I've told you several times about how important the government sector is. So we like to pull out government from the private sector. So those first bars on the left are each year, and you see the number of jobs in the private sector, dark green, and then the government sector above. And so what we see in 2019 is that we had really reaching a peak in number of jobs in Juneau and a peak in private sector jobs in Juneau, while the government sector has been slowly keeping steady but sort of trending down. And then you'll see in 2020, these quarters, as the data becomes available, we're seeing how the pandemic has just really eliminated jobs out of Juneau's economy. Government jobs are as a capital city and as a community really built around our identity as serving the state of Alaska. Government jobs have been really critical to the stability of Juneau. And this slide is a slide showing, if you look from 2010, 2011 forward, you just see years and years of steady decline in government jobs. And that just makes Juneau, we really struggle with creating enough private sector jobs to make up for those losses in government sector jobs. And there's a little thing we call capital creep, is We understand that jobs that are related to services of the state government need to be near the state population. That makes a lot of sense. But some of the admin positions where you're trying to concentrate the expertise in one place so that we can serve the state really well, we're seeing some erosion in jobs. And that might be a little parochial, but if you're looking at Juneau's economy, that's an important indicator for us. So this shows us unemployment rates, and Juneau is that very light colored bar at the bottom, and the dark color one is the nation. So Juneau, you may or may not be aware, has traditionally had one of the lowest unemployment rates anywhere in Alaska. If you want a job, come to Juneau. We're pretty much always looking to hire somebody. It's a little expensive to live here, as you saw, but I can't imagine any other reason why else you wouldn't want to live here. We see a big peak in June in the unemployment, and then if you look at December, we're getting really close to normal again. And this slide here shows us what has happened over this last year. And to understand this slide, you need to pause a second and kind of get the two colors straight here. So let me just give you a second. The blue, look at the blue first. And the blue is 2019 over a year. The dark line is the labor force, those people that are interested in working. And the dotted line just below that is those people that actually get jobs. And so there's a little bit of a difference between those two. And that's reflected in the line at the very, very bottom, which is your unemployment rate, right? People that want to work but can't find a job. And then now focus on the red, and you'll see the situation where at the very bottom you see this big jump in unemployment rate because of the pandemic. But we also saw a pretty significant decrease in the labor force. For one, people didn't come to Juneau to work in the summertime in 2020, last year, but we saw what we were seeing in September, and we were getting very nervous about permanent departure from the labor force. But as it turns out, the silver lining as we watch this data is that most people in Juneau that have stuck with us are finding jobs in the wintertime. It's our summer economy that's really been devastated. And of those that are doing less well, it is the low wage earners. When people cut jobs, and this is a phenomenon across the United States, characteristic of this pandemic, it's the lower paying jobs that went first. Those folks tended to lose their jobs first or got their hours reduced before the higher wage individuals. And we see some survey work done by the Health and Social Services in Alaska. It's a little blurry there, sorry about that. That just shows that low-income families are the most effective. The lower your income, the greater concerns you had about your living situation, your ability to pay bills, your ability to pay your medical expenses, and whereas our higher earning individuals, many of them suffered no real economic consequences of the pandemic. Rent is where things get expensive in Juneau is housing. Rent is one of them. Don't need to spend too much time on that, but Juneau doesn't have enough housing, frankly, for our people. And so that pushes prices up. And so we have this really not good phenomena at the moment where the average price of unoccupied units are higher than the average price of occupied units. So basically, if you leave a unit, the landlords raise the price because they can, because they know somebody else will want to rent it. So we really need to get more housing built in Juneau to be able to meet the demand for housing. What has done okay in this sector during the pandemic? The mining sector is probably one of two sectors that have done fairly well. We've seen other sectors struggle. The mining sector has actually seen prices go up during the pandemic of metals, which has been great. Juneau has 2 of the 5 largest mines in Alaska are in Juneau, which not everyone understands or knows that. which makes us, because we're really well paying, those are our highest paying private sector jobs. And that really keeps a lot of stability here in Juneau. The cruise industry is critical to Juneau. Our growth in Juneau over the years has really been driven by the fact that Juneau is it's the most visited city in Alaska in the summertime. It's because of the cruise ships. Incredibly popular place. We had 1.3 million visitors in 2019, and because of the Jones Act and there's some requirements, it's actually not the Jones Act, but it's the requirements around vessels stopping in foreign flag vessels traveling between U.S. ports. You need to stop in a foreign port. All of our cruise ships, all the large cruise ships anyway, are foreign flagged. And so because the Canadian ports are closed, those cruise ships can't cruise because they need to stop in a Canadian port in order to comply with the law. So that's a problem.
What's the reason behind that? Why do they need to stop in a foreign port?
So this law, and this comes from the 1880s, 1890s. It's to prevent foreigners from dominating trade in our country. So the law was to stop the British from pushing out all of the U.S. shippers, up and down the East Coast. So you had to be, if you wanted to ship between U.S. communities, you had to be a U.S. vessel. That carries over to the cruise ships as well.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from. And Murkowski and Don Young and Sullivan are all trying to get an exception for this year. The reason they may not get an exception is that because they're not U.S. flagged, they don't have to follow U.S. labor laws. And so there are groups that are not super enthusiastic about this because they're saying, well, fine, you can become a U.S. flagged vessel, but then that would mean you had to pay all of your employees $7.25 an hour, and the inexpensive cruise that everyone likes to enjoy, the cruise ship industry says wouldn't be available to them. So it's complicated, like all of these things. So we're not super optimistic about that getting resolved.
And Canada is officially closed through February 2022 for vessels?
They are. And there's a lot of pressure, well, as much pressure as we can put on them to reconsider that. Most cruises have been canceled for Alaska. There are some large cruise companies that have maintained, starting June or July. Some cruises haven't officially canceled them, but they are, every day that goes by puts pressure on them to cancel those cruises and give their clients either another option to go someplace in the world or not cruise at all. But if that makes you think, cruising was a bad business for Juneau and Southeast to be in, that's not the case. The cruise industry, once the pandemic is over, is going to come back bigger than ever. This slide just shows the number of large cruise vessels on order, and as you can see, the number of ships being built and delivered is growing per year. So we're going to see as soon as they can, end of this year or next year, it's going to be back big or bigger than ever. The alternative people talk about is small cruises and independent travelers. They're great ideas. The numbers just don't match, right? A small cruise passenger spends a lot more money, and many of these small cruise vessels are U.S. flagged vessels, and so they can travel just in Alaska without a problem. But they're just very, very small numbers. We're talking, 20, 30, 40,000 maximum versus 1.3, 1.4, 5 million from a large cruise ship. So it's helpful, but it doesn't make up for the large cruise volume. And air passengers, great. I just noticed our flights to Juneau from Seattle are ticking up. They're now $500 less than a week out from Juneau to Seattle one way, which is back to as expensive as they ever are. So I think I don't know what that really means. I'm not an airlines expert, but the crazy discounts because they were doing so desperate for clients, I think that is starting to reverse, and we are expecting to see independent travelers this summer. So just a couple other items here. I want to point out we did some survey work with our business community. We had a survey in September. 246 businesses participated, and unfortunately, more than half of them said that they would close in the next year if the pandemic continued. And here, I'm trying to get you to think about Juno. And so here's a little bit of a silver lining, sorta, to the 2020 summer versus 2019 summer. And so what you see here is on the left side, you see full-time employment. The dark blue is year-round, and then the orange is seasonal, right? We get a lot of workers come to Juneau for the summer season. So last year, none of them had jobs, but they didn't even come. We'll typically get 2,500 to 3,000 people coming to Juneau to work during the summer because there's just so many jobs, and there's more jobs than Juneau folk can fill. So it was bad for the businesses and the business owners, terribly bad. It was less of a hit on Juneau workers, because they form a relatively small portion of it, but it was an impact. And similarly with the part-time workers. We surveyed about impacts of COVID-19 on businesses. I don't think any of this is a big surprise to you. People working hours, reducing hours, delaying projects. This slide was mentioned earlier, is the sort of the grim outlook that businesses have about how long they're going to survive. While 44% say, yeah, I can see my way through this for the next year or so. 56% said, if this lasts for a year, we're in big trouble. And it does look like we're emerging from the pandemic. At least we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The really unfortunate piece for Juneau is that lack of summer tourism, because that is a huge boost to our economy. It's 20% of Juneau's sales tax. We have sales tax in Juneau, which is a big revenue for our community. It pays for our schools, et cetera. And tourists pay a huge portion of that, which we're looking like we didn't get last year, and it looks like we're not going to get this year. Not to mention these businesses, many of them barely survived last summer, got some grant support, et cetera. And then to go through another summer of this is going to be really hard on those tourism businesses. Here's a little statewide data I think people are familiar with. This is from Track the Recovery. If you haven't seen that website, I encourage you to take a look at that. That's just a national website, but it's got some good data, and it breaks down by city. But this one is about the state, and it just shows there's the overall spending, right? So you see grocery spending is up, but restaurants is down further than the groceries are up. Restaurants and hotels are biggest losers in this pandemic, but also that total spending is also down. This pandemic has been bad for the economy. People want to stay home and don't want to spend. And one of the interesting phenomena that we've come to understand is that it's not being shut down by government that makes people not spend at businesses. It's COVID disease in your community that makes people not want to spend at businesses. So there's a tighter correlation between how much disease you have in your community and spending than whether you're closed and spending. And this has been played out in some jurisdictions where in the lower 48, where you have like a state line where one side is like open for business, the other side is let's be careful. And the relationship to how much people are willing to go out and shop in the local economy is more directly tied to the amount of disease in your community. The takeaway is, let's get rid of the disease in our community. Juneau's been really good about this. I think we're fortunate that we've got small community. We're all sort of know each other. You know, we don't know all each other, but we know. I think we're all just a couple of degrees removed from each other, and there's a lot of. I think maybe it's a little easier to collaborate, but we've been able to keep our caseloads fairly low. We're the yellow number across the bottom throughout this pandemic. Silver lining: construction companies have done really well throughout this. There was a moment when they weren't doing so well at the very beginning of the pandemic, but they have they do really well. That's a phenomenon across the United States. I just met last night with the home building board here in Juneau, and yeah, they're all up. Some of them are up 25% this year. They just can't keep up with the work because people want to remodel. They're spending more on their homes. So sectors that have done better or worse, basically everybody's doing bad, except on the right side you see construction, right? The best faring sectors, mining is our first one, and then our second one is construction. But if you go to the worst faring, here's the phenomena that I think is also interesting to look at, which we'll all care about, is if you look at leisure and hospitality, you look at the blue is down, the total wages, the jobs are way down, but the gray is the average wages went up ever so slightly. And you go, well, how could it be bad if wages are going up? Well, the thing is, wages are going up because it's an average. And when you take out the low income earners and you remove a lot of jobs, it's the folks that run the businesses that maybe they're not doing great, but they're the ones that are able to hold on to their jobs. Fishing industry is, salmon is really big in our part of the world, and our biggest, most valuable market is, of course, restaurants. We do a lot of processing, but the restaurant market really dried up this year, and that's where we get the premium for Alaska salmon. In Juneau, home sales, going to just flip through these to give you the last sense. It's expensive to live in Juneau. This is the one dimension of when you look at the cost of living in Juneau relative to other communities in Fairbanks and Anchorage, is that we're just really expensive housing, and they just continue to go up in value, and a crazy tight job market. So this one, if you can just look at this is days on the market. So if you look at the very, very bottom, you'll see in 2010, it was 41 days was the average time on the market. You go over to 2020, it's 8 days, right? So there isn't inventory. People, as quickly as somebody wants to put up something for sale, it's sold right away. And if you want to buy something, you got to make a bid right away. It's super tight market, the tightest we've probably ever seen. A curious pandemic result. Our nonprofits are really adversely impacted. Business community is not giving to our nonprofits. People are working remotely, which really leads us to a fun effort that we think is going to be a real phenomena for many communities, hopefully Juneau, places in Alaska, where people want to work remotely. So we have a campaign called Choose Juno, where we encourage people to consider working in Juneau, and we want people to come to Juneau and bring their job from someplace else. And at the very beginning, just before this, we're talking about a promotion that we're working on, or a video that we're working on with our local ski area, where we're going to bring up some amazing skiers. They're going to make this great video about Juneau and skiing at Eagle Crest, but they're also going to talk about how they can promote how Juneau is a great place to work remotely. So they're going to bring their laptops and they're going to do their work from Juneau while they're here. And they're also going to help us to promote this concept that live like an Alaskan, enjoy it all, go find your Airbnb and come for 4 or 5, 6 weeks. So major takeaways: key to your economy is not just Juneau's economy, but any economy in Alaska is healthy. If we can get I feel bad for the folks in Texas. It just seems like they're not thinking this through. They need to wait and they need to be cautious. Open it up when the disease is under control, not sooner, because that really is going to what keeps consumers from spending money is their concern about getting sick. And finally, to give a little commercial, our Innovation Summit, 10th annual, a lot of fun. I hope you guys will all join us. We're going to do it virtual this year, April 7th, 8th, and 9th, just in the afternoons. We're going to focus on, the theme this year is localization in a global economy. So we're really going to look at, try to really understand that dimension of what is the role of local. I think we've all seen and come to understand how important our small businesses and how vulnerable they are, and how much we need them during this pandemic, and how easy it has been. You know, we hear 100,000 employees added to Amazon. It's just too easy for us to shop there and look beyond our local businesses when they add so much value to our economy when you spend local. Lots of fun elements at the Innovation Summit. It's not going to be 3 afternoons of Zoom. We've got a really strong tech team behind us that's going to really make this an innovative and creative event. So if you want to learn more about Juno, we have a research page. We're posting information there constantly, and it's just really great to be able to have people understand Juno's economy a little bit better, and we're always happy to talk about our economy. So with that, I will wrap it up there. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about JEDC and Juno's economy.
Thank you. I'll open it up if anybody on the call has some questions. I'll pause here before I ask some.
Should I stop sharing successfully? Yes.
So the Innovation Summit, is that anybody can attend that, or how do we get in?
You can only attend it if you really care about innovation and upping your game and networking. So it's, yes, no, but it's open for everyone. I'm trying to be funny, and I'm not very good at being funny. Sorry. But it is totally welcome. This year, you know, we usually have, it's usually in the end of February. We've done it 10 years in a row. This is our 10th year. We typically get 200 to 300 people in person. This year, it's all virtual. We're going to have a special connection to our friends in the Yukon. You know, the Whitehorse folks are pretty excited about it because it's a little easier this year for them to connect to us as well. Yeah, and it's a great networking opportunity. We'll have speakers from different parts of the country coming in, giving some new ideas. But a lot of it is, one of the elements is the innovation shorts. We invite people to bring innovations to the summit. There's a 10-minute format, little mini TED Talk. You have an opportunity, you can apply for an opportunity to present